If your child has ever grabbed their chest, gasped for air, and told you they couldn't breathe, and it wasn't asthma or an allergic reaction, it was panic. You know how fast an ordinary evening turns into the scariest 2 minutes of your week. I'm going to walk you through the 3-step response to de-escalate the fear and help your child's body start settling in those first crucial 2 minutes, plus the one sign that tells you it's not panic at all and you need a doctor. Stay for step 3. It's the one almost every parent skips, and it's the one that matters most for what happens the next time this happens. It starts without warning. Your child is at the dinner table, or in the back seat, or halfway through homework, and suddenly they're gasping, hand on their chest, saying the words no parent wants to hear. I can't breathe. Your first thought isn't going to be panic attack. It's going to be asthma, a heart problem, an allergic reaction, something that needs an ambulance right now, not a breathing exercise. And sometimes you're right. That's what makes this genuinely hard to sit with. Getting it wrong in either direction has a real cost. Miss an actual emergency, and you've lost time you can't get back. Treat every panic attack like a 911 call, and your child slowly starts learning that their own body can't be trusted, that something is wrong with them every time this happens. So here's how to tell them apart. Fast. A panic attack usually comes on within minutes and often follows a stressful moment you can point to: a fight with a sibling, a hard homework problem, or a scary scene in a movie. But keep in mind, strong crying and stress can actually trigger asthma attacks too. So you really want to look for the physical signs to tell them apart. With panic, breathing is fast, but your child can usually still get short bursts of words out between breaths. There's no wheeze, no swelling in the face or lips, no rash, and it's happened before in a similar pattern, at similar kinds of moments. A true medical emergency tends to look different. Breathing that sounds wheezy or high-pitched, blue-tinged lips, swelling, a first-ever episode with no clear trigger, or a child who can't speak at all, even in short bursts. If any of the emergency signs are there, or if you have any real doubt whatsoever, call for medical help immediately and sort out the rest after. If your child has a known asthma diagnosis, follow their action plan, or use their rescue inhaler exactly as prescribed before assuming it's panic. And if you've genuinely never seen this before and nothing here feels certain, treat it as an emergency until you know otherwise. That instinct to check for danger before anything else is never the wrong one. And knowing the difference in advance means you're not trying to work it out for the first time while your hands are shaking. And if you're genuinely not sure yet, you can say so out loud while you decide, I think this might be a panic attack, but I'm watching you closely. That single sentence does 2 things at once. It keeps you actively assessing, and it tells your child they're not being left to handle this by themselves while you figure it out. Step 1. Become the calm. The first 10 seconds set the tone for the next 10 minutes. And this is where a lot of parents try to fake it. Plaster on a smile, force a calm voice, and it doesn't work. Because kids can tell the difference between calm and performed calm. The same way you can tell when someone's smiling through gritted teeth. Regulated calm is physical, not verbal. It shows up in your body before it shows up in your words. Lower your voice below its normal volume. Slow your movements right down. No sudden gestures, no reaching fast for your child, no crouching in one quick motion. Get down to their eye level instead of standing over them. Stay close, but don't crowd them. Some kids need space in that first moment, not contact. If you're somewhere loud or bright, dim the lights if you can, or move a step or 2 away from the noise. You're not solving the panic with the environment, just removing anything that might be adding to it. And keep the words to a minimum. I'm here. You're safe. I'm staying right here with you. That's it. Nothing about what's happening, nothing about why. Just presence and safety. Repeat it as many times as it takes, in the same calm tone each time. This works because young children can't self-soothe the way adults can. Their prefrontal cortex, the part that says, okay, this isn't ideal, but I can handle it, is still years from being fully built. In the meantime, they borrow yours. Every calm breath you take next to them is doing more communicating than any sentence could. Step 2. Regulate before you educate. This is the step where most parents lose all the progress they just made. Your child's breathing starts to steady a little, and the instinct kicks in to explain, "You're okay, it was just anxiety." Or, "Why did this happen?" or let's figure out what triggered it, all said with good intentions and terrible timing. So, before we get into what actually helps here, if you want the full system for handling not just panic attacks but tantrums, meltdowns, and defiance too, that's exactly what the Calm Child Blueprint walks you through. A complete, step-by-step framework for ending the chaos across all of it, not just this one moment. Links in the description if you want to grab it. Okay, back to step 2. None of that explaining lands right now. And it's not because your child is being difficult or stubborn. Their thinking brain is temporarily offline. It can't process reasoning, cause and effect, or questions, no matter how gently or how many times you ask them. Instead, you're working with the body, not the mind. Invite slow breathing rather than instructing it. Can we breathe together? Instead of breathe. And then actually breathe with them, so they've got something to match. The trick here is the exhale. Breathe in for a count of 3, and blow it out together, like you're blowing out a giant candle for a count of 5. That long, slow exhale is what actually hits the brakes on their nervous system. You can also try grounding, naming 5 things they can see, or noticing their feet on the floor, whatever they can actually tolerate in the moment. Some kids find a hand pressed flat against a wall helpful. Cold water on the hands works for others. It's completely normal for the first technique you try to not land. If that happens, don't switch to explaining, just quietly try the next one. The specific technique matters less than giving their nervous system something concrete to focus on besides the fear. One small anchor at a time. Step 3. Reconnect with safety. As your child's breathing slows and their body starts to unclench, you've reached the moment almost every parent either skips completely or gets wrong. The instinct here is to move on fast, change the subject, distract with something fun, or, on a harder day, slip into, "That was a lot, wasn't it? Let's not do that again." Even a gentle version of blame in this window undoes a good chunk of the calming work you just did, because your child is still forming the memory of what just happened while you're speaking. Instead, this is where you reconnect, out loud. That felt really scary. Your body was trying to protect you. You're safe now. No mention of overreacting, no embarrassment, nothing about what anyone else in the room or the restaurant saw. This exact moment is what your child's brain uses to file the memory away, as "that was scary and then I was safe," instead of "that was scary and I don't know what happens next time." That difference shapes how much they trust their own body the next time something like this starts. None of this is guesswork. Each step maps onto something specific happening in your child's body, and knowing the mechanism is what makes it easier to actually do in the moment, instead of freezing. In step 1, your calm recalibrates their nervous system directly. Mirror neurons pick up your regulated state before your child consciously processes a single word you've said, which is why presence matters more than explanation early on. In step 2, you're working around a real biological fact. The amygdala, their brain's alarm system, has taken over, flooding the body with cortisol and adrenaline, while the prefrontal cortex, the logical and reasoning part, goes offline until that alarm settles back down. In step 3, slow breathing and a felt sense of safety activate the vagus nerve, the nerve pathway responsible for switching the body out of fight or flight and back into rest, which is also why your child tends to feel genuinely worn out afterward, rather than just emotionally shaken. That's the actual, physical reason reconnection has to come after regulation, not before it. Skip a step or do them out of order, and you're essentially asking a part of the brain that's still offline to do work it isn't capable of yet. A few of these are going to sound familiar, and that's completely normal. Nearly every parent has done at least one of them, usually more than once. Trying to physically stop the crying, holding a child's face still, or saying, "Stop crying," which just gives their already overwhelmed body one more thing to fight against. Talking too much, well-meaning questions and explanations their brain simply can't process yet, which can stretch a 2-minute episode into a much longer one. Showing your own panic, wide eyes, fast breathing, a shaking voice, which confirms to your child, on a level below language, that this really is dangerous. Guilt afterward. You overreacted, or it wasn't that big a deal. Even said gently, teaches a child to hide the next one instead of asking for help, which makes the pattern harder to catch early. And pretending it never happened, skipping the debrief entirely, which leaves your child to make sense of a frightening experience completely alone, without ever learning what actually helped them get through it. Once your child is fully calm, the next hour still matters. Offer water, and let them rest if they need to. A panic attack is genuinely tiring for a child's body, thanks to all that cortisol and adrenaline working its way back out of their system. Because of this adrenaline hangover, they might be extra tearful, sluggish, or irritable for the next few hours. And knowing that helps you remember it's just biology, not bad behavior. A little later, not immediately, you can gently debrief. What did your body feel like? What helped? What made it worse? Use whatever they tell you to build a simple coping plan together for next time. Even something as small as, we're going to try the 5 things game first, gives them a sense of control before it starts, instead of feeling like the panic just happens to them. Write the plan down somewhere your child can see it. A short list on the fridge or in a notes app works fine, so it isn't something they have to remember correctly in the middle of a hard moment. If there's a partner, grandparent, or teacher who's often around for these moments, get them using the same 3 steps and the same phrases. A child relearning different rules from different people slows the whole process down and makes each episode feel less predictable, which is the opposite of what you're going for. If these attacks are happening often, interfering with school or sleep, or you're ever unsure whether what you're seeing is panic or something else entirely, that's worth a conversation with your child's doctor or a mental health professional. That's not a failure on your part. It's just the next right step, and catching it early tends to make everything after it easier, both for your child and for you. Years from now, your child isn't going to remember the exact words you used, or whether you got the breathing technique perfect, or which grounding exercise you reached for. What they'll remember is who stayed, who didn't flinch, who became the safe place in the middle of the scariest 2 minutes of their week. That's the goal here, not to erase the fear completely, because fear is going to show up again in some form no matter what you do, but to make sure your child never has to move through it alone. The next time it happens, and it likely will, they'll already know one thing for certain before either of you says a word: you're staying.